Guys, the UK housing market is about to crash, and that is the end of the Ponzi scheme, this scam that has been going on in the UK housing market of inflated prices finally coming to its natural conclusion. Not my words, these are the words of a reporter from the new Statesman. I'm going to react to the short video that he's done on the UK housing market and how he thinks the rising prices over the last few decades has been artificial, and essentially how the UK housing market has been for some time now destined to collapse, destined to burst, and we're all in a lot of trouble. Let's take a look.
For decades, Britain's house prices have risen steadily. Rising interest rates and changing demand, that now seems set to change. Britain's property boom is a national exercise in self-deception, our economy's biggest lie. Real wages have hardly risen for more than 20 years, and the pensions of today's workers are mostly paper thin. But the dizzying rise of the property market has offered a substitute for economic growth. It was a substitute people accepted.
Okay, immediately I have an issue. I'm jumping in early. I did economics at school and at university. I think he's being a bit disingenuous here, or maybe he doesn't know. He said that the rise in property prices offered a substitute for economic growth, i.e. GDP. The way GDP is measured is that it doesn't include property price growth. That's not part of how it's measured. Property prices don't go into the measurement of GDP for any country on earth. So immediately there's this false conflation with property prices and economic growth. I don't know if he's included this on purpose to kind of mislead us or whether it's a genuine mistake, but let's carry on.
Because it seemed permanent. The expensive house that sucked up a lifetime's wages became the savings account, the pension, the inheritance. That wealth is now beginning to dissolve. This is the Great British Housing Con.
Very emotive.
House has been falling consistently for the last 4 months.
So one quick point, yes, they have fallen consistently over the last few months. But the reason behind that is because we had an economic meltdown caused by Kwasi and Liz Truss's budget announcement, which really sent the economy into a tailspin. You'll remember it, okay, because it's still emblazoned, it's emboldened in our minds. Interest rates went like that, mortgage interest rates went like that, GDP fell so badly that they sacked the PM and the minister and the finance minister. So there's context behind this.
And how a slump in house prices could mean big things for Britain's economy and our politics. We're in Oxford, which is the least affordable city in the UK for first-time buyers. How does this particular estate in this street sum up what's happened to social and private housing?
Yeah, we're in a crossroad estate built in the 1930s, part of the general building that began after the First World War to try to solve our problems of slums. So much of this housing will still be council housing, but some of it's being right to buy. If you're in one of these and you're paying a private landlord, you're paying much more than your neighbours will be. And if things carry on as they are...
Okay, I'm going to jump in. He said some of it's been right to buy. If you're not familiar with the right to buy scheme, it basically gives social housing tenants the option to buy their homes. Now, again, conflating landlords with that. A landlord, an investor, cannot participate in the right to buy scheme because it's only reserved for social housing tenants who want to buy their home. I couldn't go and buy a social housing property because it's on the right to buy scheme because I'm not a social housing tenant. So again, kind of misleading. I don't know if they're doing this on purpose, but you really need to be aware of this stuff whenever media talks about property. I say this all the time because of reasons like this.
You eventually lose this as a social housing provision and it becomes somewhere where students might live or members of staff at the university might live.
And it's changed hands a lot, right?
When housing is sold, it then changes hands, although once a landlord gets hold of one, they'll tend to try to hold on to it and then to make their return. Until, of course, they think it's the house itself might fall in value. We stopped really in the 1970s building social housing.
That is definitely an issue, guys. We need social housing. Every country, as long as there's going to be people who are below average wage, who are in poverty, who don't earn an income, and that's just life. It's a function of capitalism. You need social housing, and he's absolutely correct. Under Thatcher, we stopped building social housing. Tory politics, right? When it comes to economics and social issues in the UK, there is a shortage, and we need more.
People came from all across Europe to see what we were doing. We were the most successful country in Europe as far as housing was concerned. The 1946 birth cohort of children, the majority of them a random sample all born in 1 week, spent some of their childhood in a council house. So growing up in a council house was normal in Britain. And we brought that to an end in the late 1970s. We've just moved further and further towards the private market, and an increasing number of council houses have been sold on to private landlords, and an increasing number of owner-occupied houses have been sold to private landlords. So now we have this enormous private rented sector. Having a decent social sector puts a lid on rent. Why would you pay a landlord a huge amount of money if you can get a house from a social landlord? But if you make the social sector smaller and smaller and smaller, then the private market begins to dominate.
Well, look, the private market is supposed to dominate. If you have an economy, a UK housing market, where the social housing sector, i.e. the majority of houses out there on the market are provided by the government, then you have a problem, right? That's not an efficiently operating market. Yes, I do agree with him that, yes, rents are high, but more so in specific areas of the UK, which again, they're not mentioning. They've chosen Oxford, which is one of the most expensive parts of the UK, and a lot of other media attention focuses on London for obvious reasons. It's the capital, but they never do these types of documentaries in, say, Bradford or Hull, Stockton-on-Tees, where people are just fine housing wise in terms of affordability. All right, yes, wages are lower in those areas, but affordability is not as much of an issue. They really focus on the extreme examples when they do these types of documentaries, pieces. It's interesting. You've got to pay attention to these things.
Because you've got a lot of people who don't live in the house, so they need to own it. They can sell it on rapidly.
The clever money thinks if we get out before the fall, we'll do okay. And of course, some private landlords have mortgaged themselves to the hilt because they get another mortgage so they can buy more property, so that in the future they think they can get richer and richer and richer. But that doesn't work when the prices and the value of the property begins to come down.
When these houses were first built, they would have been worth, a few multiples of a person's yearly earnings?
Worth a few, but of course they were all rented. You couldn't buy them. Now, the price around here is about 380,000, just below the Oxford average, which is a price of 16 or 17 times average earnings in this
Try living in London, mate.
city. But we can go just a few hundred metres away from here and find housing that costs millions and millions, when it really is, just 100 metres away.
Again, what's the point here? You could go to pretty much any area of the UK and find properties that cost millions of pounds. It's just the nature of living in pretty much any city in the UK. You're always going to have extremely expensive houses in cities or towns, but those are the minute portion of the total stock available. Is making it seem like, there's £1 million houses everywhere that loads of people are competing for and can't afford. It's not the case. Guarantee that's not the case.
This is just hidden away just off the Crossroad estate.
Something that appears to have benefited the people who live here a great deal, so they, having the most expensive properties, will have made the most money from them. But it could be that these are also the houses that will depreciate by the most.
It's possible. If this housing crisis is more like the 1930s and 40s, then that is possible. The opposite would be what happened in 89, 1991, 92, where the depreciation was most at the bottom end of the market, because negative equity most hurt first-time buyers, and people were very scared about buying a house then. So, and that's what we're used to. We're used to the houses at the top holding their value, houses at the bottom slipping.
In Britain, we had an extremely...
Again, depreciation is not an issue unless you're selling the property. If you buy and hold a property for, say, 10, 15, 20 years, there will always be points in time where the property price, the value, goes down, goes up. But over the long term, it does that, okay? And I'm going to prove this to you, okay? This is the UK Land Registry. These are the prices of property over time for the whole of the UK, property that was sold since 1970, so 50 plus years. Look at this graph, okay? I'll zoom out slightly. Going from 1970 all the way to 2023. Now, what you can see is that there are periods, of course there are, where the curve goes downwards, okay? There's a section here where it goes downwards and then it goes up. So from 1989 to 1994, 5 years, call it, being approximate here, of declining property prices. And then from there onwards, from 1994 to 2008, 2007. That is incredible price growth. And again, there were periods along the way where the price dipped. It dips there, it dipped there, it dipped there, it dipped there. But over the long term, the graph is going up. And then, of course, we saw that crash from 2007 to 2008, the global economic crash. Prices globally, but in the UK here specifically, took a downturn. But interestingly, look, they hit the bottom in 2009, and that recovery peak in 2010, and then that recovery peak in 2010 wasn't reached again until 2013. But again, look at 2013 onwards. Okay, the point I'm trying to make here, guys, is that depreciation happens along the way, but over the long term, property prices rise. As long as you're not selling, you won't suffer.
Rigid class system that was enforced by all kinds of social observances and processes that then loosened after the Second World War.
Yeah. Partly because out of politeness we cover it up. We don't recognise how much we've returned to the 20s and 30s in terms of social divisions.
Housing has been this determinant of the way that people vote as well as the way they live.
Yes.
And
True.
What do you see happening to the way people feel about the political choices that have been made about the housing market if that wealth starts to evaporate?
There is a danger of wishful thinking because I don't like how divided this society is, and it is the housing wealth which is keeping it divided. Housing and the idea that the Conservative Party will do whatever it takes to keep the house prices as high as possible.
I mean, again, I disagree. First of all, I don't know how housing wealth is dividing society. What's dividing society are other topics like, the competence of our government ministers and how corrupt they are, okay? And still manage to hold on to their jobs. That's what divides society, not housing wealth, in my personal opinion. Let me know what you think in the comments below.
It's a kind of conspiracy, isn't it, amongst everyone taking part in a market that they know is irrational. That's the con, isn't it? The housing con is that people have put up with the decline in real wages or the stagnation of real wages, paper-thin pensions, but they felt like they were getting wealthier because the price of their house was going up.
Yep, and it's conned a whole generation. The oldest of that generation, not so bad, except for them it's what they're going to give to the grandchildren, and so that dream for them has gone.
Again, this whole concept of a con. Now, what I do agree with vehemently, the most true thing that I've heard in this little piece is that real wages stagnating is the issue. That is a huge issue, right? Real wages have been flat for decades in this country. So whilst the cost of everything is doing that, so the cost of your utilities, your mortgage costs, your petrol, housing, rent, everything is going up and your wage is staying flat, so you're worse off over time. Completely agree with this guy. They should lead with that, right? Rather than making this piece more about housing being the issue. The cost of houses isn't central to this. And to say that it's a con, again, let's look at the data, guys. Even if you bought a property just 15 years ago in 2009 at the bottom of the crash, maybe you probably wouldn't have bought it there because it seemed like the world was falling apart, so the last thing you wanted to do was buy a house. So let's even say January 2013 here. The average property price was £167,000. So in 10 years, your property price, and these are averages across the UK, by the way, would have gone up to £290,127,000. That's almost a 100% increase if you bought the average property across the UK. So to say that so many people are worse off, the actual data, the government data, disproves that, guys. It's simply not true.
For the youngest, for the people who just bought into the end of the Ponzi scheme, this is looking potentially very, very bad. For the wealthy and those who've got a choice, I'll spare money away in that slightly more expensive house than the one we could have bought, rather than investing it locally, creating jobs, or even going out and spending in ways that would help other people. So if you can only just make it here, if this is the most expensive place you can just afford, and you can only just afford a mortgage, and you can only just afford the school fees that you have to pay if you live here for the kid, then you sit, not going on holiday, not spending out. Your multiplier effect is negative for people.
Okay, I think I've seen enough. So what are my overall views on this? I think it's disingenuous, guys. I'm going to be honest with you. The real issue, as I said, is wages, productivity, it's the economy. Housing is not the culprit. So it's almost like it's a hit piece on landlords and people who can afford properties and who have done well. You know, people who've done that have actually worked and made decisions to invest or buy. They've saved up their money, right? Unless you got it, you know, via an inheritance or it was given to you, or your house was given to you. The majority of people save and buy their own house. So to then kind of structure this piece in terms of it's all a con, it's all a Ponzi scheme, the market's irrational, I really don't get it, because we don't behave or talk about any other asset that you invest in like we do about housing. I think it's the fact that landlords just have a negative stereotype in the consciousness of the country. So when we're talking about inequality and wealth, affordability, it's easy to go for them, right? But let me know what you think in the comment section below. Am I being biased because I am a landlord myself? By the way, I'm not rich. I grew up on a council estate, okay? Working class, and I built up my funds to buy property because I thought it would be a good investment. When I was at the bottom of the ladder, the bottom of the social economic scale, and I saw landlords doing well, I thought I would like a piece of that for myself, and that's why I took the decisions that I did. But let me know what you think. Guys, thank you for your continued support on this page, on this channel. Like and subscribe. I'll see you guys on the next one.